And one thing most Mississippians do every single day in some way is drink tea. Whether it's sweet or it's unsweet is up for debate, but that's not what we're talking about today here on Good Things, although I may ask our tea farmers which way they like it best. But we have joining with us Thomas and Hillary. They are tea farmers in Laurel, Mississippi. They started the Longleaf Tea Company, and it started by asking themselves a question: why aren't we growing tea here in Mississippi if we're drinking it every day? So we're going to get the story behind that. So welcome, guys.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hey, Rebecca. Thank you.
It's good to have you on Good Things. I've sort of been following your tea story a little bit, and it's something I drink every day, although not hot. I do prefer mine cold, but that's something we can dive into later. I'm curious, though, how did you two find yourselves in the business of farming tea?
Yeah, that's a fun question. It probably goes back about 10 years. I was leading some projects for an engineering firm in China and based out of Shanghai. And Hillary and I were over there spending time, and we started falling in love with really good tea. And we were asked the question when we were over there, Rebecca, like, where do you all grow your tea? Like, where is your tea region in the U.S.? And we were like, we have no idea. We don't think we grow any. And so we did a little research and found out that 99.99999% of all the tea consumed in the U.S. is imported. So we're just not growing our own tea, but we drink so much. I think we're like the 5th largest consumer of tea in the world. And so Hillary and I kind of sat on that and thought, what in the world? Why don't we give this a shot? Think we can pull this off? So that's kind of where it started. I mean, anything you would add?
Well, I would love to know, like, how, with your international travels and being over in China, and I know in Japan, tea's a completely different, like, it's their coffee, I think, versus maybe the way that we use tea, especially here in the South. But what else is sort of different with tea internationally? Because I know it feels like here in the United States, we're lagging behind in our tea snobbiness, and I know it's catching fire, and I mean that in the best way possible. We're there with wine. I think we're getting there with craft beer. We're semi there with coffee, but we're definitely lagging behind with tea. But overseas, they take their tea seriously, right?
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, all of the high quality tea that's produced in China, in India, in Sri Lanka, all really stays in those countries, and we get kind of the leftover, what they call the fannings or the dust. And it's kind of what we're used to. We've gotten used to the bagged, lower quality tea, but there's so much more to it. And you mentioned coffee and wine and beer, the same way that we've gone from a couple beers that were popular when we were all growing up to all the different microbreweries. There's the equivalent opportunity of different amazing teas out there. They're just hard to find in the U.S., and so we're starting to import some, but the cool thing is we're starting to grow some and produce them here as well.
Which is something I think a lot of people are interested in, knowing where everything on their table comes from, getting down to even their beverages. I know it's a little bit harder to get your coffee locally here in the U.S., especially here in Mississippi. You can get it roasted locally, but maybe not grown. But tea, it seems like we have a good soil or a good, setup for foundation for growing tea. So when did you make when did you have the conversation after your trip and say, you know what, why aren't we growing tea? Why not do tea here in Mississippi? How did that transpire into planting your first plants?
Yeah, so we did research for really about 7 or 8 years. And what was interesting, and we were living in Shanghai, like I mentioned, and then Nashville, and then Houston, Texas. And at each stop, we were talking about this it was a slow burn project in our back pocket. But the more research we did, we learned that, wow, Mississippi, our home where we're from, is really one of the best places in the world to do it. It's at the same latitude as all the other famous tea growing places. It has the great acidic soil. The soil drains well. We had the exact amount of rainfall, great sun. So everything was lined up that was perfect. And Hillary, I mean, your family land goes back, 5 or 6 generations?
Mm-hmm. It's about 6 generations. And so finally, when we kind of came to the point where we could return home to Laurel, moving from Houston, we really had that opportunity where we had land available, too, to take the project to the next level.
So with your family land, Hillary, you said 5 generations. What was traditionally farmed there, or was it just family land that has just been passed down for a homestead?
It is a pine tree farm.
Oh, interesting. So how many acres did you dedicate to your first batch, or I guess to tea?
Yeah, well, it's probably, from an acreage standpoint, it's probably, we started with a quarter acre, just almost like a test plot. Before we jumped in head first, we wanted to see, can we actually make this grow? Because we were just doing kind of the academic side of the research. But so we decided, let's grow 1,000 plants and just see if we can make it work. And honestly, Rebecca, they did awesome. They grew at rates we had yields that honestly is pretty rare and no one expected. And so we've expanded, and we're at just under 3,000 plants now. So right around a half acre under tea. We have plans to push that out to about an acre and a half. And then we have another zone where we're, eventually, if this all works, to push it out to about another 10 acres of tea in the near future.
Help us to sort of understand how a tea plant grows, and then maybe like how many cups of tea are you getting out of one plant? Will it regenerate itself, or do you have to, put the seeds back in each year? Does that make sense? Kind of like with tomato plants is what I'm thinking of. If you can get X number of tomatoes off of a plant each year if it's going well, versus just growing one item that you would pull out of the ground and then that would be it. Am I making sense?
Right. Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah, it does. So if we look at it that way, one tea plant will produce maybe about a pound of raw leaf a year, which gives you about a quarter pound of finished tea. So for one tea plant, in a quarter pound, that's, there's 16 ounces. It's not a whole lot for one plant. That's right. You really have to have. That's why you see the tea plantations in China or Sri Lanka that they're massive. So you have to have a lot of tea plants. But if we look at it in terms of an acre, that produces about 2,000 pounds of finished tea per year, about a ton of tea, and that's really what we're trying to get to. And so what you really do is you can harvest. It's just the new growth. So you're not harvesting anything from the plant except for the new growth. And so usually, actually right now, last week, we had what's called breaking bud. And that's when the new growth comes out. And we will harvest in about 2 or 3 weeks, our first harvest of the season. And then we can reharvest from those same plants about every 2 to 4 weeks as that new growth comes back. And the plants they could live 100 years. And that's the great thing. It's one of those crops that you don't have to replant every year. They will grow and live for 100 years.
Oh, that's cool. That takes like all of many listening to Good Things, we're already getting in our mindset for our garden, as Good Friday rolls around and Easter. You have to till it up, you have to plant it, then you have to, go through the whole thing and tear it all down and do it all again. It's fascinating to think that if done well and you keep them healthy, that the first tea plants that you planted will stick with you as you sort of expand and grow your farm, or I'm sure that's at least the thought process behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Most definitely. We're hoping that, down the road, it'll be our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids still getting to harvest from the same plant.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so now I'm leaving from tomatoes and whatever and going to more like pecans, where you get like your, but completely different. You have to remember, I'm simple-minded and trying to figure out sort of how to best categorize it. I know pecan trees are much bigger probably than your tea plants there that are. When is the harvest season for that? You mentioned you're fixing to take your first harvest or maybe have it in the next couple of weeks. Is it the summertime?
It is. Mm-hmm. It starts in April and
starts in here a few weeks, and it'll run through October.
Mm-hmm. So every weekend from now until the end of October, we will be on the farm plucking tea. So it's going to be a fun summer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part that people need to know too. Is this has to be hand plucked. There's no machinery that necessarily goes out there and does it for you guys, right?
Not yet. Everything is 100% hand plucked and handmade right now. As the plants get larger, there's certain machinery that mimics. It has like kind of almost like the way you would harvest grapes. They have like rubber, and so it mimics a human hand kind of plucking the tea. There's other equipment that cuts the tea plant, but we're trying to avoid that because we want to keep our quality high.
Keep your quality high, and we're going to keep this conversation going. More with Thomas and Hillary, the long